presentations for the evening, for this week, for this year, for winter session. This is the only one this evening. There's 2 more people coming in right now. Come on in. I just want to tell you that Katie Jacobson, writer in residence, is named for an alumni of our program who there you go, Katie Jacobson, and it honors her commitment to public literary engagement, particularly in this. We're thankful to be able to have this funding. It comes from her family, and to be able to have all these events tomorrow night. Red Cat, your tickets will be available at the box office. Those are free. I sent you an email, texting email to find out about how you get your parking reimbursed. More information will be forthcoming. 8:30 tomorrow night. Doors open there around 7.
Make sure you have your ID or some form of ID to prove that you're a CalArts student to get your ticket from the box office.
Something with your name on it. You will have to pay for the parking and go back and ask for your money back. Because that's how they do that.
Oh.
Some of you who are first-year students have not met Brian Evanson. And introduce our Katie Jacobson, writer in residence, Stephen Grant Johnson. Are you ready, Brian?
Yep.
Born ready.
So it's good to be back. I'm glad to meet those of you I haven't met before. And want to welcome you here tonight to this event. And I'll kind of emphasize again what Anthony mentioned before. This is a Katie Jacobson Writer in Residence event starring Stephen Grant Jones. The Katie Jacobson Writer in Residence program honors CalArts creative writing MFA alumni Katie Jacobson and her commitment to public literary engagement in Los Angeles. Some of us here tonight, including faculty in the creative writing MFA, had the pleasure of reading in events curated by Katie, and all of us are very pleased to welcome tonight's reader in her name. The other thing I want to say is that the CalArts main campus, where we are tonight, sits on the unceded ancestral lands of the Chagwayata Vitam, the people of Chagwayanga, whose present-day descendants are the citizens of the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. They have been here for millennia and will forever call this place home. Through meaningful partnership and collaboration, CalArts is committed to lifting up their stories, culture, and community. It gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce Stephen Graham Jones, who is the New York Times bestselling author of nearly 30 novels and collections. He's been a National Endowment of the Arts recipient, has won the Texas Institute of Letters Award for Fiction, the Los Angeles Times Ray Bradbury Prize, the Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award, the Independent Publishers Award for Multicultural Fiction, WLA's Distinguished Achievement Award, ALA's RSUA Award and Alex Award, the Locus Award, 4 Bram Stoker Awards, 2 Shirley Jackson Awards, 5 Mrs. Horror Awards.
Get it.
And he has been a finalist for the World Fantasy Award and the British Fantasy Award. He lives in Boulder, Colorado, and teaches at the University of Colorado Boulder. The thing I find so interesting about Stephen's writing is its refusal to fit neatly into a box that people want to fit it into. He's published books that are considered horror, books that are on the syllabus of Native American lit classes, books that qualify as experimental fiction, and books that seem to have a foot in all those genres. Whatever box you end up trying to put him in, he's very good at sawing his way out of it. On the one hand, Stephen knows more about horror fiction and horror film, slashers in particular, than anybody I know. On the other hand, he writes fiction that, because he's so well aware of what others have done, refuses to repeat what's come before him. He's one of those writers who are less interested in writing in the genre and more interested in pushing the edges of the genre and making it go somewhere new. With his 2020 novel, The Only Good Indians, for instance, Stephen manages to write a book that profoundly satisfies his horror, but also thinks very carefully about what a Native American experience in literature can be, combining the three in a way that makes it feel triple-voiced and makes it possible to read it in several different ways, depending on what you bring to the book. His 2 most recent novels, My Heart is a Chainsaw and the forthcoming Don't Fear the Reaper, are meta-commentaries on slasher films, with the main character in the first trying to figure out what particular slasher she seems to be in at any given moment before it's too late, so that she'll know how to act, and with the characters in the second beginning to explode the genre altogether. Indeed, these books are about genre, about the way in which stories both enable and constrict us, and about the very human need we have to look for literature and other narrative media for answers in terms of how we navigate life. What's so nice about the way Stephen does this is that it's not pessimistic. There's real joy in storytelling that is at the heart of his fiction, and anytime I read his work, I find myself responding to it personally and intensively, rather than exclusively intellectually. There's a lot more I could say about Stephen's other books. There's Mongrels, which turns the werewolf novel on its head in a way that thinks about class. There's The Fast-Bred Rogue, which takes on myths about Indians in a gleeful way that reminds me of Ishmael Reed's Sharp-Toothed Satires. There's Night of the Mannequins, which is about, well, a murderous mannequin. It gets more complex than that. There are countless stories as well, among which are some of the most terrifying stories I've read. And that's only beginning to scratch the surface of what Stephen does. But whatever he's writing, it reads like something that only Stephen could come up with. And it's also something that sticks with you and troubles your sleep. Please join me in welcoming Stephen Graham-Jones.
It's an honor to be introduced by Brian. And I always feel like I owe Brian an apology because when I have a book coming out, publishers always say, we need lawyers. And I'm like, oh, just do what you want to do. And they always think and know that Brian is like the authority, like he's the smartest dude on the scene and he's the best writer. So they always say Brian, and I feel bad that they keep asking Brian. Sometimes I can catch him, I can say, let's not bother Brian anymore. Because sometimes they don't even ask me, they just do it. But it's always an honor to be read by Brian, for sure. And actually, I doubt if I'm even up here at all if it's not for Brian. Can y'all hear me? I can take this off, can't I?
Okay, okay, thank you.
Move the microphone.
Just take it out. Be seated, sorry.
Hey.
Is this better? Yeah. All right. If y'all notice me trailing off or getting too far, let me know. I'll fix it. So I'm going to talk to you about some horror tonight. And I really don't have a complete sense of how long it'll go. If y'all get bored, you can leave, I guess. Because I'll go on and on about horror. And yes, afterwards, let's have a discussion. If y'all want to, ask me whatever questions that this stuff prompts. And also, can y'all see it well enough? Or look, if I turn this light off, are y'all too much in the darkness? Is that too dark? That's too dark? That's good? Okay.
Okay for the stream?
Is it okay for the stream?
Checking real quick.
Oh, I'm going to be walking around too. Is that a problem?
I cannot see you. So if there's a
You need one
light that we could put near the back, I think that would be fine.
What about?
I don't think this room is that flexible.
You hold a flashlight under your.
Oh,
That's nice.
Is that nice?
It's good mood lighting and it works for the concept. It's good.
Yeah, that's excellent. Now, the shadow starts moving.
Oh, no, we gotta leave you.
Run.
All right, y'all ready? Horror. What and why it is, how it works. So cut this into 3 sections. Section 1, Section 2, Section 3. Section 1, I'll say some stuff. Section 2, I'll say some more stuff. Section 3, I'll stop saying stuff. And there's going to be some explicit content in here, so if you're not into that, be ready to close your eyes or run away or do something like that. This is a horror talk. What is horror? You know it when you see it. That's a pretty useless definition. It doesn't help me at all. An emotion, a mood. That's also, a lot of people say this. This does not ever work for me. Maybe it's like hard to prove untrue, but it doesn't help me understand horror at all. Cheap, juvenile, not art. That's people who aren't horror fans, It's often smuggled in as supernatural thriller, gothic, all this stuff, Like up in Canada, when they write grants to get their books published, they have to call it like dark thrillers or something. But nobody wants to say they like horror. Nobody who wants respect will admit that they like horror. And therefore you get people nowadays, if they happen to stumble upon a horror book they like, they're like, this must be elevated horror, which insults the rest of horror. The rest of horror is crap, but this one, I kind of like this. What they're really saying is, I like this one. They're not actually distinguishing any of its characteristics. It's just, I like this one, and so it must be elevated. So if you can, shy away from that term, I say. A rallying point for a disenfranchised culture? Yeah, maybe. But that doesn't really help me either. That's more like a sociologist angle. So none of that. Horror is a destabilizer. It's transgressive, better than most at provoking a visceral response. I think horror, the only one that I see competing with horror for provoking a visceral response as far as literature, as far as fiction goes, is romantic comedies and romances. I think they make you cry involuntarily if they get you into their realm long enough, you know? But horror can make you gag. It can disturb your sleep patterns. It can make you walk around the parking garage instead of through the parking garage, like that kind of stuff. I think that's really big, you know? Like I never read a John Updike novel and then change my daily behavior. You know? Horror lingers. The good horror lingers. The good horror sticks with you when you don't want it to. Good horror, it lays like dark eggs in your head that hatch at 2 a.m. And that's kind of what we pay for. It's weird, huh? That which intends to disturb. The disturbing, I think, is very, very important. And also, what's disturbing about this picture to me are work. Oh, scary. What's scary to me, like, is a horse person wearing loafers. Like, but I wonder, would it be more scary if it looks like an Equus actor actually? If that person was, I assume it's a person. You know, I don't know. It could be a horse wearing a tail. I don't know. But if they were wearing riding boots, I think that'd be even weirder for a horse to wear riding boots. So that'd freak me out more probably. But horror is supposed to be scary. Why do we engage horror? You know, all those reasons. Because we're sick, twisted, wrong. I don't buy that quite, but it is a little bit right. Because some irresponsible guardian let us watch this or that or the other, you know, which I don't know. That could be true, you know. Because it's something that can be only ours. Like, you know, when you're 13 years old, riding in your parents' minivan, and your mom or your dad grab one of your cassettes or CDs or plays one of your songs somehow. I'm dating myself pretty hard here, I guess. But they play some of your music through the Windstars sound system, and they like it. They're like, "This is pretty cool. I like it." And you like groan inside. You're like, "No, Mom, I don't want you to like that." It does not make our world better. You want something so harsh and thrashy or offensive that your parents will not like it. It can be only yours. And I think a lot of people are actually drawn to horror for that reason. You know, but they don't want the other people to like what they like. It could be because we need horror. I think we do need horror. Years ago, I was in some doctor's office reading a science magazine of some sort, and it was talking about the difficulties of getting farm-raised fish to market fresh. And they like to deliver them in tanker trucks of water close to their location or close to a hub so they can get them out to the places and be, you know, guaranteed freshness. And the problem was they'd send, I don't know, I'm gonna make up a number, 100 fish, and they would get there and 30 of those fish would be dead, which is a lot of attrition. You know, you're losing a lot of your money there. And so they tried messing with the pH and the saltiness of the water and the temperature of the tank and the water. They tried all the little variables that they could identify. Nothing changed it. I mean, you kill a few more, keep a few more alive, but they're still losing too many fish. What somebody finally thought to try on a lark was, what if we put one predator fish in each tank? And it turned out that nearly all of the fish made it to market because that predator fish swimming among the sheep fish kept those sheep fish alive because they were nervous. They were always moving away from these teeth. And I think that's how horror acts for us as people. Horror keeps us alert. And it just, I mean, individually and as a society, I think it keeps us alive. I think we're wired for horror. The reason we're wired for horror is because leopards have been tracking us in the trees for 6 million years. You know? We're completely, like, before we were even, like, exhibiting the types of sentience that we have now, that we say we have now, everything on the savannah wanted to chomp on us, from the big giant predator birds to the leopards to other other hominids probably. And I think the result of that, the reason for that is because we were losing our claws, our teeth, our camouflage, our speed, our muscles. We were trading it all in to have brains. We didn't know it was an investment that was going to pay off. We were just kind of, who knows why it happened. Nobody really knows why it happened exactly. But the result is that we were chicken nuggets in the savannah. You know, anything that wanted us could have us pretty much. If it could run us down. And yes, we had numbers and we eventually got language and all that helped us defend. But I think before all that, horror, or the idea of teeth in the darkness and in the tall grass, got hardwired into us. And so now in today's world, it's very sterile. We shine lights into all the dark corners. And what that does is kind of erase horror from our lives. What horror can do is reintroduce some of that horror. It can be the predator fish in our tank and help us just be more vital. I feel like it. I think when we're engaging the type of fear that horror can deliver to us, that we kind of dial back and become more human, more like we were biologically built to be. We need horror. We need the fear. That dude looked really scared. But yeah, so there's so many skulls they find that have those teeth in the back that like to come at you from the back. But they're also finding that some of these holes line up with giant, big bird. What do they call them?
Talons.
Talons, that's it, yeah, talons. Some people say we like horror because it's a roller coaster with a safety bar pulled down. That it's a pseudo death experience with no actual threat. I can buy that to a certain extent. I think that's kind of disrespectful of the power of horror, though. I think horror can do things. I don't quite subscribe to the roller coaster idea. I think horror does contain danger. It's not just a simulation. You can see something you can't unsee. You can feel something you can't unfeel. Have y'all had that fear when you're watching or reading or engaging some type of horror? Yeah,
Yes.
You do, and it's a very real fear. It's like the dean on Community, Right, man. If I remember correctly, he's watching a video of a Dalmatian person when he says that. Not somebody from Dalmatia. It's like a. Or there's all these on the edge films that are supposed to can get in our head and shake us up and maybe change us, This is just, I've gone this far. I haven't gone as far as Martyrs in a Serbian film or The House that Jack Built. Have any of y'all seen this? Yeah, brother, are they good? Are you different? Are you? Welcome. And you can go from kind of happy to really sad, And be careful if you search this image up, because somebody went in and put some actual dangerous stuff in here. I think this is the clean version, but even so, it starts out with a grudge, and you get down here to fetus munchers, porn gore. There's some bad stuff, And I feel like if I were to watch fetus munchers, I would definitely come out different in some fashion. Or as far as fiction goes, Pet Cemeteries are pretty brutal. Poppy Z. Bright's Exquisite Corpses, really, really brutal. I think The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum is one of the most brutal that we've seen. And Brian here has given us some of the most brutal stuff for sure. I thought it'd be weird to put him up here, though. He might sneak out or something. As the dean says, it's better not waking anything with me. As y'all know from Community, it does. After that, he's watching all this kind of stuff. Why do we write horror? As Stephen King says, he gets asked that in so many of his early interviews. He's asked why do you write horror, which, in case y'all need a decoder ring, the real question there, the subtext is, why are you so weird? I get asked that a lot, and that's all I hear is, why are you so weird? Why don't you like normal stuff? But I think some people are just wired for horror. And I think a lot of us write the stuff we want to read. I want to write stuff that just really affects me, and so that's what I want to write if I can. The world isn't all rainbows and unicorns. Nice unicorns, because there's also this kind of unicorn. Horror can be a survival tool. All horror has, like, the way it can be a survival tool. I used to be on a zombie defense team. We'd go around to high schools and talk to students about how to prepare for the zombie apocalypse. But oh, I gotta stay in the light a little bit. But what we would always explain to them at the end is these are wonderful tactics for defending yourself against zombies. They're also wonderful tactics for if you're crossing a park at 3 a.m. and someone jumps you. You know, we're teaching the same self-defense tactics. Horror can keep you alive, and that horror makes you aware of both your surroundings and your community in a different way, and that can benefit your survival, I would think. And all horror has a cautionary tale to it, as near as I've found, anyways. Maybe don't go into that old house. Like you want to talk to the screen of the page and tell them that. Let's not see if we can work really hard in the lab and come up with a process to reanimate the dead. Should we really open that book with all the warning stickers on it? That one lake everybody dies at. And it goes on and on and on. Or talking particulars, Marion Crane and Psycho should not have stolen that $40,000. You know, that's what gets her into her horror cycle. All camp counselors should do their job. They should not be having sex while little kids drown. You know. Micah from Paranormal Activity should not set a camera up to record them while they sleep. And much, et cetera, until you get to the limit configuration. You know. I believe in cycles of justice. This is just me saying this. Really, it's just me saying all of it. But I'll explain to you. There's closed, open, and some people prefer this hybrid. I think that's crap. I think it's a switch. It's either open or shut. It's open. But a closed cycle of justice is like the camp, like Barry and Claudette and Friday the 13th. They should not have been having sex while Jason was drowning. They should not have neglected their duties. Therefore, they kind of invited the horror in, if that makes sense. This is the 1999 version of The Haunting of Hill House, and number one, they kind of entered Cycle of Justice head first when they agreed to this remake. But but number two, they're all there because do you want $1,500 to spend the night in this house? And that's greed, you know. That's thumbing your nose at things that are threatening, and that's a way to call down the badness in horror. Marion Crane, of course, as we talked about, she's asking for it. That's all closed. It's all like it's contained. You know, you do a crime, and within that circle of like, and then somebody within that crime, some force or person or agent or something, has purview over you because you submitted to this. Does that make sense? All right. And then there's open. And we all want Reagan from The Exorcist. Like, she's just a 10-year-old girl in D.C. bopping along through her life, and suddenly Pazuzu crosses the Atlantic Ocean and strikes inside her head and takes her over, and pretty soon she's doing this kind of stuff. You know? She didn't actually invite that, you know. She did. But to tell you the truth, if you watch Exorcist closely, you'll key on that one scene where she is down in the basement playing with a Ouija board, which is the first way she talks to the demon, you know. So maybe it is a little bit closed in that she doesn't do it out of like hubris or anything. I think she just do it out of playfulness. But still, like, what's that movie? Is it Veronica? I think it's Veronica. It's a Spanish movie where it's a Catholic school and these 3 Catholic girl students during a solar eclipse go down to the basement to play with the Ouija board, and like that's asking for it, you know. They deserve whatever happens. Boring disaster, asking for trouble. But if you want a real open one, like Casey Becker in Scream, and the opening thing, all Casey Becker did in Scream, the 2 things she did was she dated Stu X month, like 5 months back or something, and she sat next to Sydney in class. So therefore, Sydney would be keenly aware of that empty seat beside her when she comes into school on Monday. And so Casey did nothing. All she's doing is staying at home at night watching movies by herself, and she gets made an example of to terrorize someone else. I think she does nothing to call down what happens to her. She didn't ask to be strung up in a tree and gutted, you know? Who does? What about Sarah Connor in Terminator? I think she, at this point in her life, she has done nothing to deserve what happens to her. And actually, you know, having the savior of the future probably doesn't really, from some perspectives, doesn't doom you either. maybe having that hair does. I don't know. Jamie Lee Curtis, she just sitting in class. Laurie Strode is just sitting in class in 1978 in Halloween. She does do something to key Michael on her. She goes up and leaves a key on the door, but that's not like a crime. That's not a transgression. And Michael is he's just a killer whose motivations we cannot understand. Why are people in horror movies so stupid? Ask this, non-horror fans usually ask this question.
Like they're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
Hey, that just came through here. Let me change my audio settings real quick. All right, see if that worked. Sorry for this load on y'all.
Oh, that's great.
All right.
Like they're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
Yeah, that's how non-horror fans talk about horror. And they talk about that because there's stuff like this happening. This is from Shopping Mall, maybe some of y'all know, and probably a door. Security robots on the rampage. Here comes some heroes. Yeah.
She's terrified. She's horrified.
So when they talk about stupid characters, they're talking about Barbara Crampton laying there with a cut on her calf and not moving or crawling or doing anything, you know. It's because the director is telling her, stay there, you know. Not Barbara Crampton, her character. But how to object to that? So you're saying all the characters in a romantic comedy are brainiacs? I do have some objections to that, I guess. And so you're saying all of Alice Munro's and Richard Ford's characters make the right decision all the time? No, the stories in which characters only make the right decision are not fun stories at all. We need characters to go off path like that. Stories aren't about characters making good decisions. Horror stories aren't about characters making good decisions. They're about us believing their poor decisions. And so it's about building your character such that when they veer left instead of veering right, we completely understand that this person would have gone left. You know, it's as simple as that, really. If horror is unpleasant, there's some people watching. I don't know what film they're watching. That was significantly louder, was it?
The preacher said, Sean, the preacher looked at the woman and said, you look like a bat, but you aren't dead.
So if horror is unpleasant, we preserve, like I would prefer dancing around like a penguin to being absolutely terrified to my core, I think. Like I definitely prefer it over that, you know? Then why do we go to stuff like this, you know? Why do we like this little bloody mouthed kid holding her sister's head or something? I don't know what's going on. Why do we click on all these? Or maybe I'm the only one who does. Maybe they're here for me. I don't know. 29 of the creepiest things ever said to my kids. Hold on. I wish this wouldn't happen on my computer, but it does. All right. Yeah, do y'all click on these too? These keep me up at night. I know that they're paying a high schooler like $3 an hour to come up with these. I understand that. It doesn't mean they don't scare me, you know? Y'all look some of those up, and they're pretty dang creepy. Man. Why don't we go to haunted attractions? We pay $45 to be rushed through a 12-minute thing where there's actors jumping out at us with rubber knives, and we go back the next night and pay $45 more, you know? And I do it. I'm terrible about it. First, all of us don't, you know. And like I was saying, I think horror is hardwired in, but I think it's really because
The woman, the preacher said, Charlie. Ooh, the preacher looked at the woman and said, you look like a man when you are dead. You not like this? That maybe not read anymore. Do it.
That's a lot of us, isn't it? A lot of us are like that. All right, check this out. Like, you can feel that communal sense of relief after the scare. I think that communal sense of relief after the scare is it's like an affirmation of life, you know. And I think we don't watch horror to see Pennywise eviscerate 12-year-olds necessarily. That's the fun. That's the way you get to a celebration or an affirmation of life. I feel like, which is what horror can give us when it's done properly. You know, I'll forever feel terrible. Let's see. I was watching The Conjuring. I think the second week it was out, maybe the third week. It was on a Friday, a matinee, and it was me in the theater and a dad with two what looked like 10-year-old girls, one of his daughter, one of his daughter's friend. And you know, The Conjuring gets pretty intense, especially for a 10-year-old. I wouldn't take my 10-year-olds to it, I don't think. You can't ever say. I don't know. Depends on how good they are. And when it gets really intense, about 45, 50 minutes in, the dad was like, finally like, you know, this is pretty heavy for these girls. They're not going to sleep. So he trucks them out of there. And I feel so sorry for those girls because they didn't get to process through the horror. They're forever caught in the badness. They don't get to see the light at the end of that dark tunnel. And I wonder whatever happened to them, you know? So. What does horror need to work? Needs characters. Yeah. We have to care about who lives and dies, says the audience. The audience will walk away. So audience, film or books, they leave if they don't care about your people on the page. Horror needs people, not carving dummies. Look at Joyce Carol Oates's Where You Going, Where Have You Been? One of the like seminal horror stories of the 20th century. She takes all the way until here. All she's doing before this is introducing Connie, making Connie a real person. And after that, she can do all the horror she wants for the rest of the story, but she's got to make Connie real. And granted, this is an old-fashioned mode of storytelling where you get like 2 pages of a past to say this character does this, her name is this, her family's like this, she lives here, all the introductory stuff. Joyce Carol Oates this is a very antique style of storytelling. Nevertheless, even if this were dispersed through the whole story, it would be the same amount of stuff, I think. And we have to care about your characters. You know, Stephen King, people say that he's not edited anymore. You know, he'll have a 300 page novel. He'll have a 650-page novel. And for like 280 pages, it'll be, yeah, Meet the Robinsons, they do this, they do that. There won't be any horror for the longest time. And that is kind of boring, but what he's doing is making you care about those characters. And so that when he puts them into the meat grinder, you don't want it to happen, you know? A quarter of Joyce Carol Oates' story is meet Connie. That's not a bad ratio to look for, I think. We need revulsion. I love this. This is from one of the Recs. Is it Rec 3? Do y'all know the Recs? Yeah. That's pretty brutal, huh? That actor needs like an Oscar for that. I think both of them do, really. We can just stop here and watch this all night. Without the words. Revulsion launches the reader, the audience, into a horror space. And you would think it's me saying that, but it's not. It's The Philosophy of Horror by Noel Carroll, which is really a good book to read, I think, if you want to understand how horror works. That's Blake's famous picture. Physical, and he identifies physical revulsion, moral revulsion, and cultural revulsion. I kind of suspect there's also political revulsion too. That might be a subset of cultural. I'm not totally sure.
One more.
Yeah. We need monsters. Horror needs monsters desperately. There's a huge taxonomy, and there's just random dispersed like stars monsters too. There's fusion monsters, ghosts and vampires. They're both alive and dead. This is all Noel Carroll's like classification system too. Zombies, mummies, they're alive but dead, or they're decaying and mobile. Merfolk, which is mermaids and dagons and all that. And I guess selfies, right? Fish and human. Medusa is either a snake plus a human or a god plus a human. Possession is a demon plus a human. It's all wrong to us. Haunted houses, they're animate. They're supposed to be inanimate. There's this dude, the xenomorph. He is insect plus a mammal, which is quite weird. There's this kind of stuff. I think is that Rocco Team on special effects for the thing? I think it is. Doing that kind of. We think that this started with when we got the technology to do it, but this has been going on for a long time. Back in the woodcutting days, they were doing this kind of stuff. Werewolf is wolf plus human. You would think that would be a fusion monster. Actually, Carroll argues that it's temporal fission. It's not fusion, but fission. It's the wolf and the human occupy the same space at different times instead of the same time, like a zombie, which is alive and dead. Here's and he also identifies spatial fission, which is kind of like bilocation or something. Little 2-minute short film, not even that long, I think. It's got a long intro. I should have get that. You get more chills from that than a lot of feature length stuff. There's another version of that, I forget the title of it, where a father is coming in to tuck their 6-year-old son in, and he's up there in covers, and he says, Dad, there's a monster on the bed, under the bed. And the dad says, all right, I'll look. And he looks under, and the son is under the bed. He says, Dad, there's a monster on top of the bed. There's monsters of massification. The massification is like a lot of individual things forming a single unit, like ants. Ants are good at that. Chuck Wendy's good. Those are the zombies in the movie version of World War Z. They're acting like ants, pretty much. What's that? Slither, I guess. Magnification. That's the most famous one. King Kong, of course. That's from The Bay, I think, which is pretty terrifying. That's not that terrifying. It's kind of cute. I wouldn't like it. That's Night of the Lepus. There'll be some good eating in there. Can you imagine walking through the trees and coming across that? That would shake you. And then there's our all too human monsters, Henry Lee Lucas, Travis Bickle. Those are actually the scariest, aren't they? Because they seem a lot more plausible. Like a rabbit that weighs 2 tons, we're like, yeah, come on, you know. But where's it gonna find 5-ton carrots? You know, we don't. It doesn't make total sense. But these guys, they make sense. It just takes a well, evidently a white person with a gun. That was pretty scary. The Good Son, do you remember that? The Good Son is disturbing. Yeah. Devil's Rejects, it's not exactly comforting, you know. Annie, she's kind of disturbing. They're scary people. People are scary. Horror pretty much requires monstrousness of some kind. I said it requires monsters, but it really requires monstrousness, and the monstrousness can express through so many different ways. It doesn't have to be tangible or physical even. Common sense. And this is really important. This is what so many creators of horror disregard or don't even know about or something. I don't know. Hope. Like, and this is, you know, in a screenplay, which this is really Joseph Campbell's monomyth made into a horizontal line instead of a circle, you know? But right about anywhere from, I would say, the 60-65% mark up to about the 95% mark, you will get a spike of hope. And you start feeling like, oh, it's going to work out. They're going to survive. It's going to work. I'm happy that the police are coming here or whatever's happening is going to work. And then it doesn't work. You know, like, do you remember in The Shining, Dick Halloran makes that journey from Florida all the way there, and we watch every leg of his journey. You know, the airport, the snowmobile, all of it we watch, and we think that's wonderful setup by Kubrick largely, by King as well. It's documenting every step so that we can anticipate the culmination of that, which is Dick Halloran saving the day, saving Wendy and Danny from Jack. But then, man, like 10 steps after he steps into the door, Jack chops his head, you know, and our hope is killed. And killing our hope close to the end of the story is really important in horror. You'll get so much mileage out of that. And at the end, you get something like that, which is fun. Techniques and tricks. One toe, that's one of the most effective tricks you can use in horror, I think. Like this is, if you watch The Descent, have y'all seen The Descent? It's pretty terrifying. Well, I'd say the first, it's a lot like Jeepers Creepers. The first 45 minutes of it are just stultifyingly terrifying, and then it kind of tapers off. But if you watch the backgrounds, you see, like in the blurriness, there's something, and then it's gone, you know? And we're just seeing a small bit of it, and we're constructing the rest of this monster in our head. And when we put that monster together in our head, then we assemble it from our own fears. And we assemble it from our handsy uncle, from a bully we had in 4th grade, from all these bad people in our life. We Frankenstein them together and to complete this, to do the body, the arm, the legs, all that. And that is so much more terrifying than anything that the writer can deliver to you, I feel like. And that also makes the audience, whether fiction or film or television, a participant in the creation of the monster. And if you participate in the creation, you're automatically more intellectually and emotionally invested. And when you're more invested, that's when you can really do a scare on somebody. Well, when the audience is invested, that gives you power to do a good scare on them, I think. Here's a really good example of not showing the whole thing for a while. This is from A Tale of Two Sisters. pretty unsettling, isn't it? Look at how it is. And where are you going? Where have you been? This description of Arthur Friend. He wobbled again. Out of the side of his mouth came a fast spat curse. And a sigh not meant for her to hear. But even this Christ sounded forced. Then he began to smile again. She watched this smile come, awkward as if he were smiling from inside a mask. So she's just seeing a very small part of a real Arthur Friend. You know, his whole face was a mask, she thought, wildly tanned down to his throat, but then running out as if he had plastered makeup on his face and forgotten about his throat. That's pretty dang unsettling, you know. It's instead of showing, if he is in fact a demon, which is some reads of that, you know, argue, then it's scarier not to see him in his demonic form. It's scary to see him just glimpse him. Glimpses are so much more scary. Like, y'all remember Shyamalan's movie Signs, right? When we were just seeing the toe of the monster around the corner, that was pretty unsettling. You know, but when we see the whole thing, we're like, it's kind of stupid. But when you see a little bit of it, you complete the rest. It's terrifying. Here's another Arthur Friend thing. It's just a screen door. It's nothing. One of his boots was at a strange angle, as if his foot wasn't in it. It pointed to the left, bent at the ankle. That's quite disturbing. You know, I mean, I'm not saying it's bad not to have a foot. It's bad that he's faking like he has a hoof and he's acting like he has human feet. You know. Activate their imagination because they won't be able to turn it off. Just let the reader and the audience's imagination run wild. It's like almost like your job as a horror creator is to just grab their head, your reader's head, and pull the scalp off so that all their bad thoughts can come out. You know, that is. Your job is to haunt up the places. You know, make them look like that. I think. The way that Psycho traumatized a generation to take a shower, the way that Jaws traumatized a generation or a whole century about the water, you know, the way Stephen King tried to mess up toilets for us in Dreamkeeper. Remember Dreamkeeper? He has the shit weasels, they live in toilets and they do bad things. Gore. You can have it this way, like, you know, Kevin Bacon's character in Friday the 13th, getting that arrow pushed up through his long neck. Or you can have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where the victim is placed on the hook, but we don't see the hook go in. We only hear the hook go in. I think this is a lot scarier. Texas Chainsaw. I mean, I like Friday the 13th. Don't get me wrong, but I think Chainsaw Massacre sticks with us in a different way, a better way. So, which is worse, you know, Tucker and Dale beating somebody into a wood chipper, or looking at that image, you know? That's really the question. Which makes you feel more squiggly, more weird? And for me, when I watch this, I think about the pumps that must be right over here to spray the blood on him. I think about it as a movie, you know? With this, I'm like, you better be careful, you know? That's going to leave a cut that will not heal for a while. Do you like watching Herschel Gordon Lewis? Do you like watching Texas Chainsaw Massacre? I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre is probably the way to go, depending on your mood, because Texas Chainsaw Massacre doesn't show you the violence; it suggests the violence. The same way that this guy hits the ball in the Scott McCloud's Understanding Comics in the gutter. You know, we complete it. Horror works on that, so it works with that and on that so well, just bloodily. I'll try to terrify you first, and if that doesn't work, I'll horrify you. And if I can't make it there, I'll try to gross you out. I'm not proud. So gore has its purposes. You know, Art the Clown would agree, I think. Jump scares. Jump scares are harder to do in fiction than they are on screen, and the reason for that is we control the pace in a thing we're reading. We're turning the pages or letting our eyes go across the lines. We control that pace. The reader does. In a film, in a movie theater especially, you can't hit pause and allow yourself to breathe and get ready for what's coming. But I'm not saying jump scares are impossible. Have any of y'all had jump scares in fiction? Yeah, all right.
Oh, yeah.
When what? Do you remember?
Jeff Vandermeer's the second book of the Annihilation trilogy.
Yeah.
The moment where she goes up into the attic in the place, and the guy's behind her, and she doesn't know it. She just feels the breath and turns around. I lost my mind.
Nice. That's wonderful. Have any of you ever like dropped a book because it startled you? That's the goal. If you can make somebody do that, then retire. You know? Or package it up somehow. There's a Luton's bust method. This is from Cat People in 42. She's being stalked by something. She's not sure what. So you throw something that's not the monster at a moment when the tension has been ratcheted higher and higher, and it's really, really effective. That's a good jump scare. And you notice how, well, this is from Exorcist 3. Do you remember Exorcist 3? Yeah. I can't tell if it's playing or not. This is one of the best jump scares in the world, I think.
Yes, I'm fine.
Do you notice how both that one and the previous one and the Tale of Two Sisters have this long dread ramp to get up to the jump scare? That's really, a lot of people disregard that long dread ramp, but that's what makes it scary, is that long, slow build. This is basically, like, that's the path to get up to a scare, I think. It takes a while to do it. There will be a lot of closet cats, as I call them, or it's Val Lewton's bust. It's these fake things that release tension, you know? So you're wanting to go up there, you want the rear to go up there, but you take one this winding path, and there's a cat there, there's a cat there, there's a cat there, and finally you get to the naked cat. This is a lot of stories and movies mess this up. I think one ghost is so much scarier than 14 ghosts, and 14 is an arbitrary number. It can be 12, it can be 42. What is this from? Oh, Ted Lasso. Wait, what you're telling me is we got 400 ghosts? That's too many ghosts. Or like in The Howling, Eddie Quest, one werewolf is scary, but when we see 3 werewolves, it becomes comical. You know? Not because of the claymation, because of the numbers. In Sixth Sense, the girl in the tent was terrifying. But when we start seeing 3 people hanging from, like, when we get all these other ghosts, then it gets a lot less scary, I think. Is that from Amityville? I remember from Amityville Horror, I forget.
13 Ghosts.
Oh, it's 13 Ghosts. Yes, that's right. Thank you. Shannon Elizabeth, not an American Pie. This is, do you remember Darkness with Anna Paquin? It's a Spanish film. She's in this haunted house and she doesn't know it, but every time the camera pans back, there's like a whole slew of ghosts. And I remember sitting in the theater seeing this. I was only in the theaters in America for like 2 weeks. And it was me and one other dude about 3 rows in front of me. And the moment this scene happened, that guy says, "Man, that's just too many ghosts." He was totally right. And that's from No One Gets Out Alive, a recent film. That's like way too many ghosts, I think. There are ghosts everywhere. There's nothing to do nothing if there's that many ghosts. Ghosts of Mars, that's quite a lot. It can work too, though, I think. This is the end of Last Night in Soho. And I think it a little bit works there. And it really works in Maniac, both versions of it, I guess, the 1980 or 81 one, and also the 2012 one with Elijah Wood, because this terrible serial killer has been scalping women and bringing their heads home to put on mannequins all around his house, which is not a nice thing to do. He's a bad dude. But then at the end, either the mannequins come alive and tear him limb for limb, or he falls so deep into his head that he thinks that's what's happening. We don't know either way, but it actually kind of works, I think. But the best argument for me is Alien is scary. Aliens is not scary. You know, when there's an endless onslaught of aliens, it's just like it's like a video game. You know, pop this one, pop that one, pop that. It's not as scary. When there's one alien, that's terrifying. I'm not like me to talk bad about aliens. I know a lot of people love it. It's a fun thriller. I don't know if I'd call it horror. One dude standing in the corner at the end of Blair Witch is pretty terrifying. If there were 4 people there, that would not be nearly as terrifying. You're like, what are they looking at? You know? And we should talk about dread versus terror. Dread is sitting on your couch all evening waiting for a knock you know is coming at the door. That's dread. Terror is opening the door and seeing what's coming through, I think. And fiction is really, really good with dread. Film is much better with terror, I feel like. They each can do both, but each have their strengths too. And video games, people tell me video games have wonderful amounts of dread. I don't know. I don't play video games. Y'all can tell me. Explanations. Who is it? That's Brad Dourif in Alien 4, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And he had died earlier in the film, but then at the end, when like the new baby mammalian alien is being birthed, they realize they need some exposition, and so he's suddenly alive on the wall, and he gives a big like doctor lecture about what's happening. You know, it's a little bit corny, but it's Brad Dourif, so he kind of makes it work. But explanations in fiction are not helpful, I think. If you over-explain in fiction, it becomes dark fantasy because you realize there's a system behind all the chaos, the unknowable things. You realize that if you pull this lever on the wall, that light turns on. And that's not how you want horror to work. The way horror works is I'm in a dark room, I don't know where the walls are, I'm not even sure about gravity. That's what horror is, you know, not knowing the system. When there is a system that makes sense, that has explanations that make everything make sense, it kind of stops being horror for me. Kills the tension. Like Francis Dollarhide in Red Dragon. You know, he's a terrifying dude. He's really, really bad. However, when we understand that he was turned into that kind of monster by his grandmother, then and I chose that cartoon because I felt really bad putting me in the grandma. I searched up online and I thought that would be me inviting trouble like me and stealing $40,000. You know? When you realize he's just another victim, then the story it becomes a story of victims instead of a story where there's a terrible monster. Does that make sense? Like even in Silence of the Lambs, Thomas Harris fixed that a little bit. He did not explain James Dunn nearly as much. He doesn't explain Hannibal Lecter at all, which is what makes Hannibal Lecter so scary. We don't understand how this vast intelligence can be so cannibalistic, and we don't have to understand. We just have to know it's happening. I guess we do find out later in this novel. In the movies, I guess we do, yeah. Comedy, that's from Dawn of the Dead, right? Yeah, Dawn of the Dead. Comedy and horror. So the way horror wants to work is something bad happens, something worse happens, gets a little bit worse, gets pretty pretty dang bad. And then all of a sudden you have the shining elevators with blood, blood, blood. And as I said in the earlier topic, horror climbs you really fast up the terror ladder, and then you're just at this shrieky plateau for the rest of the story, which is unvaried and kind of how we become uninvested with things flattened out. So what you need, you just everybody screams like that for the whole thing from Scream fans. What you need is horror to climb up a little bit, and then you get a laugh, and that laugh resets us and lets us dial back down. Then we go back up, have another laugh, come back down, go back up. He's a pretty good laugher, and then come back down, and then you finally get to the top, and something like that. You know, that horror. Like in all storytelling, you need peaks and valleys. Like Kurt Vonnegut, he was the first one I heard say this. But here's a
Get one of those in your eye, can pop like a ping pong ball.
This is a good horror and comedy thing.
It's not funny. That hurts.
It's from Severance.
Expect
Not the
more from
series.
someone. Come on! Steve, you're on the other side.
Steve?
Don't worry about him. For the rest of the movie, they gave him a lot of ecstasy, so he's great for the rest of the movie. But then you notice that it's terrible, and then a laugh. Every time it closes, you laugh. You know, it resets us, and we climb back up, and we even get hope that it's going to work out. Like well, watching that Exorcist 3 one, when that police officer towards like the 80% mark of that, when he steps out and he comes right back in, you're like, hope, the police officer's there, nothing bad's gonna happen, he steps right back out, and then the hope goes away. Splatter comedy is fun. What horror needs most of all? People who want to be scared say that. It needs you. And what are you scared of? I only write about things that I'm scared of anyways. You're told to write about everyone's basic fears. Burning, drowning, suffocating, heights, being alone. There's probably some more. Make use of our inborn fears, the ones we have as infants, like instinctually. Falling, loud noises, stranger anxiety, creatures. Make use of our taboos. Murder, incest, cannibalism, fenestation. Fenestation is messing with dead bodies. Those are all good. They can all disturb us. But what is your relationship with creatures or cannibalism or whatever? How does that scare you? Like she is either scared of the news or werewolves. One of the two. You're also told make up your own monsters because we're tired of vampires, werewolves, mummies, ghosts, zombies, all that. We're tired of all that. That you hear people say that a whole lot. I don't really listen to that because I like to do werewolves. But I'm all for Mansquito too. Mansquito is great. If it's got a happy ending, it's not horror. You hear that too. Happy endings for the protagonist or for the forces of evil, for the antagonism, for the antagonist. That's the first question when you hear a happy ending for horror. Because sometimes in horror, it will end with who you thought was going to be the lone survivor getting the axe or whatever. And that's not always sad in horror because that means it's opening up for a second installment. You're kind of happy about that. You're happy it's going to come back. You're happy that Art the Clown lives or whatever it is, you know. You're happy you saw Jason's eye flicker behind his hockey mask. As for short stories, they can often end down because the reader has invested 20 minutes of their time, and so if you explode everybody at the end, so what? Novels, people want to invest like 6 or 8 hours of their time. they probably need at least a qualified happy ending, I feel like. And the same with movies. They tend to need a qualified happy ending of some sort with horror. They tend to land on the happy sad, really. One person makes it and the franchise opens up for more and more installments. So, to write good horror, you need characters we can believe in, identify with, maybe root for, stage some revulsion early on to launch us into a horror space. We need monstrousness of some kind, supernatural or not, it doesn't matter, and maybe just one monster, not 14. We need the dread of a single toe, punctuated with jump scares, to flip that dread into terror now and again, and thus make it let it disturb us and linger and linger and linger. We need comedy as a pressure release valve and no big explanations. So that's, if there is a magic formula, that's the best one I've identified, anyways. And we need you scaring yourself for our pleasure. On screen, you can't have functional flashlights. That's like a horror killer, you know? Cars that start when you need them to start, no way. Police who respond, that would not help anybody. Friends who won't split up, those are the worst kinds of friends. And baddies with normal mouths. Ever since we got CGI, all of our baddies look like this. On the page, if you ever find yourself in a horror story saying eerie, spooky, scary, all those kind of words, that class of words, that's signaling the reader that I have not made this scene eerie, and so I'm telling you it's eerie. I visited a class by Zoom, I think, and it was like some sort of data class. I didn't really understand what it was, but they were plugging the texts of novels in and trying to establish the frequency of certain words in different genres. If that makes sense, some sort of analytics, I don't know. And so they brought me being a horror writer, and they said, we searched your text for like these words and more of the words that we associate with scary. And before they came answer, I told them, you're not going to find that. I think the words you'll find most in horror are maybe night and darkness. You know, you won't. Only like hack writers are going to say spooky. You know? It reminds me. Did y'all watch Ned's Declassified? Yeah. And Ned's Declassified. Ned and Rose and what's the other one? There's a third one. It doesn't matter. They're walking. It's like a Halloween episode. They're walking into a warehouse and it's super spooky. There's like webs and darkness and sounds and they're creeping. And finally, I think it's Mose, she finds a lever on the wall and she pushes it up from spooky to not spooky, and it's all bright and happy. I always think of that when I see those words. Too many ellipses, I think, ruin horror. Too much like fake suggestiveness. Too many exclamation points can ruin it as well. I think you can have jump scares on the page. I just think they're hard to do, but I think you can have them. Some people say you can't have first person present tense, and Stephen King might be one of those people. I think Philip Pullman is another person. Did y'all see Philip Pullman? Like in the last few months, he was saying he is revulsed when he opens up a book and it's first person present tense. Or no, he just said present tense in the first place. He said that's not how fiction works. Like for him, the default is past tense, and to read present tense, he has to totally reorient his mind and to endure this unpleasantness for 300 pages. And Stephen King, in the opening of The Stand, I think is it Howard Laudner, who is the horror writer? I think it is. Or somebody's a horror writer early in The Stand. And Stephen King dismisses him by saying he's one of those writers who writes horror in the first person present tense. Like that's a completely dismissible category of writer. I mean, not only do I think you can do it, I've done it myself. And I'm the Indians and My Heart's a Chainsaw. And well, if they're not first person, they're just present tense. But I think present tense can be effective. It's really hard to judge. It's really hard to juggle. Present tense is hard because what past tense gives us is distance from the events. The point of narration is post the events, and that gives you the ability to accordion things down, to compress, and also to put a layer of interpretation or retrospection between the narrator and the events, which is that's wonderful to do. But it's a great challenge to write in present tense because you have to, number one, figure out a way not to document every single step your character takes. You have to still fast forward sometimes. There's a lot of tricks, and it's not easy, but I think it's worthwhile. On screen and the page, you need to open strong, usually with a blood sacrifice. I get so bored with a horror novel or a horror film that doesn't splash blood all over the screen in the first 4 or 5 minutes. I usually drift away if that doesn't happen. Like, you remember in It Follows? At the 5-minute mark, we see that girl whose name we never even know. We see her on the beach, torn up like this, and that establishes the mortal stakes of what's going on. It like resensitizes us. It contextualizes within the story a lot better. And sometimes just a killer series of lines will do it.
No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality.
Shirley Jackson, Haunting of Hill House. Give us some real people. Casey Becker was pretty real to me. Terrorize them to death, like in The Ring. Keep the jeopardy high, like Wendy and Jack do, or like Jack does, anyways. Give us an ending that doesn't contain the horror. We prefer the horror to bleed out into the world, into our lives. Like that arm coming up at the end of Carrie. You know?
Yep.
Or the end of Rosemary's Babies. He has his father's eyes. And what's scary about that is you understand that, or there's a sense of understanding that Rosemary is going to raise this demonic child. You know, that's the scary part. It's not the scary part that this hybrid exists. The scary part is that she's going to raise it. And then go one step more, like in Body Snatchers. This is probably the most famous one step more, Friday the 13th. Yeah. Or this is actually a better one, Night of the Living Dead. After Ben has won the day against impossible odds, then the white justice mob pops him. Yeah. How do you do that kind of one step more ending? Identify what your character cares most about, signal what winning is, and then make the cost of winning what your character cares the most about. An example is The Mist. Some of y'all seen Frank Darabont's The Mist, right? If the Mist moves in, it's got huge, lumbering, quite carnivorous creatures in it. They're unstoppable, pretty much. And so this guy, is that Thomas Jane? Is that right? Is that his name? Anyways, the actor, the protagonist, his son is what is most important to him. Winning is escaping the monsters. And so he shoots his son so the monsters won't get his son, which is terrible. That's a terrible thing. One step more is right after he shoots his son, the military rolls in. The noises he heard through the fog weren't the monsters. The noises he heard were the tanks approaching to save him. So if he had waited 4 or 5 minutes longer, he would not have shot his son in the head. You know, brutal one step more. And you know, this is really more about endings in general. It works for horror as well. Most stories, you get to the end of them, you can go through A door, you can go through B door. You set things up to go through one of two ways, you know, a win or a loss, basically, an up or a down. Your job as a writer is to always find the third door, open it, and maybe there's a door behind that, you know, and keep opening doors until you can't stuff the story through anymore. Here's an example of one step more. This will be the final thing, and then we can talk. It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye. It goes about 6 minutes, maybe 7.
Thanks, Jack. What do you want? You want me out of the car?
You see, now you're just being silly. Always, Jack, you go too far. Always, you take things too far by one step.
Hello, sir. Super அந்த பொம்பளை எனக்கு எத்தனை காப்பு விதியா மோட்டி பாய்ச்சல் மாதிரி கட்டிங்கன்னா சூப்பர் 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 முகத்துக்கு அவ்வளோ பெருசிಲ್ಲ மோட்டி கனசா ಸಾಮಾನ್ಯನೇ ಈಗ ನೇಮಕರ ನಾನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ
I don't believe it. I don't believe I give in for chocolate. It's so lame.
It's a toy. Look, look.
Oh,
It's like a little cheap guy. Yeah. Look at me. Wait, she give me a K? She wants it to. Yeah. She give me a K? What's her name, man? Jill. Jill? She's giving her up, yeah. Deep breath, sweetheart. Send me up. Keep an eye on me. Yeah, that's right. Take deep breaths. Just keep looking at me. Just give us a break, right? Really appreciate it, mate. Now, can you talk to me and tell me where do you feel the most pain? Jill? Jill, it's okay. Keep breathing. Keep your eyes focused on me, sweetheart.
So that's got so many of the elements we talked about, right? It's got the comedy as pressure release valve. It's got the gore. It's got the one step more is I wanted you to notice there though. And also it's a closed cycle of justice. He's asking for what he gets for that. She is in an open cycle of justice. She didn't do anything to ask for that. He is asking for it. He always, as she says, the first line she says to him, you always take it one step too far, and he does. You know. And you get everything you need from that little 6-minute film as far as horror goes, I think. So a good exercise is what do you consider super safe and untouchable? I did this, actually, I was in a grad workshop back in the late 90s, and the professor led us through this. She said, what do you consider the most sacred? And I decided that motherhood was what was most sacred to me. How can that be amplified and perverted? What's one step further into that specific darkness? Who can this happen to? What kind of situation did they have to be in? And so what I did was I wrote this novel, Demon Fairy, that in that, a mother walks down into the fruit cellar in a country house, and her 14-year-old son is just stepping off the stool with the noose around his neck and hanging himself. And as any mother would do, she rushes to him, grabs him around the legs, but instead of lifting him up, she pulls him down, you know? And that was the worst thing since motherhood was the most like sacred to me, that was the thing that I could pervert to the best effect, you know? I had some example, I don't know what that was. Questions? I can turn the lights on too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I turn this on? Go ahead. Alright, wonderful. What questions do y'all have about horror? About anything? Anything, you know? Yes.
I do have a question regarding the 1 Ghost versus 14.
Yeah.
Where would you put like cult movies or such as like Midsummer?
That's a really good question because that is the same dynamic. And I think that's the specific reason that I have yet to see a cult movie that I like. I think, is there any markers here? No mark, it doesn't matter. I think horror works best when it's like a video game pyramid. You start out with a bunch of baddies, then it's 12, then it's 8, then it's 4, and then it's 1. You get to the big boss. I think that's how horror works. Cult movies usually work out like Wicker Man. There's weird stuff going on, and you walk into a room and there's a lot of weird people there, and you're like, oh, it's a lot of people. It's everybody in this village or whatever it is. I think it wouldn't be scary as a person to encounter a dangerous cult like that. I don't think it's a wonderful build for horror. I did not like Midsummer. I thought Midsummer failed. I think Ari Aster films actually, the difficulty they have is that he places the big blood gag, the big horror gag up front. Like in Midsummer, it's the carbon monoxide deaths, and Hereditary, it's the beheading of the little girl. Those both come pretty early in the stories, and after that crescendo, you go down for a long time. And I think that's not the right build for horror. I think horror goes from low to high instead of high to low myself. And also, I should admit, this feels like a prejudice that I'm exhibiting, because a lot of people like and get a lot from cult films and cult stories. I just never have. They never scare me, and I think the reason they scare me is probably that one slide I put up about why are horror characters so stupid. And I'm like, can you not see how obviously this is a bad village to be in, and that you should possibly leave? You know, so I don't buy into cult stuff. Yes, but I think in the real world, not in horror stories, the militia people living out in the desert and stuff, they are terrifying, legitimately terrifying. I think, but as far as stories go, it's hard to make it work. If I come in I shouldn't have said desert. Yeah.
We're militia.
Maybe opening up a completely different kind of question, but I've watched through this, okay, I read through this, I've spent a lot of time looking at Hitchcock, but it's suspense, some terror and different
Yeah.
cartoon. I've never in my life gone to see a horror film. I've been the closest. I mean, I have seen Moses Baby on a small screen.
Mhm.
Michael Haneke say that's the most the White River kind of horrifying. But do you have a kind of idea? I mean, you think it was universal. Through all you've said,
Yeah.
and I get that. But I really avoid horror.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you have a kind of idea. If by now you've got theories about why some
Well,
people just don't go.
I think it's just a matter of thresholds. People have different thresholds for what counts as terrifying for them, you know? For
Also
some,
choosing not to be terrified. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say.
Oh.
That it's not like different things terrify me. It's that I actively avoid horror films. I wonder
Yeah.
why.
a lot of people do. And I think a well-told horror story turns you, the reader, or the audience, into a puppet, basically, and you're trotted around. And that's a certain sort of violence, I think. And I think there's a lot of people who don't like to be a puppet. You know, they don't want to be jerked around into this room and that staircase and all that stuff, and that's completely legitimate. And horror people should not shame people who don't want that treatment. I think that doesn't do horror any good. Horror should just accept that this isn't for everybody. You know, and I don't think it's bad that it's not for everybody. Sometimes I think my life would be happier if I just watched Matthew McConaughey and Kate Winslet.
What are some things that are really unpleasant?
Yeah.
I just wondered if, I don't know, I've been trying to understand myself, was
Yeah.
it something to do with the childhood? Was it some
You know, back
Is it
in,
just me?
Back-
It's not just me.
in my early 20s, I was actively failing out of college because I was addicted to playing Dungeons and Dragons with a group of people. And we were having a great time for like 72-hour marathons and stuff, you know. And then one of our players, his girlfriend, wanted to play with us, and she was not from the Dungeons and Dragons world remotely. But she said, "I can do this. You know, I can play a game." And so we let her play, and we're clerics, we're barbarians, we're elf thieves. And because she was a new person, we allowed her to pick her own character, and she decided to be Glinda the Good Witch. You know, and Glinda the Good Witch talks in a high tittery voice and casts sparkly spells on people. She didn't really fit in with the campaign or the world. And mixing the kind of horror adjacent people with the non-horror people meant that we stopped playing Dungeons and Dragons forever. But the good thing is I passed college, you know, so it all worked out. That sounds like I'm saying horror people shouldn't mix with non-horror people. That's not the case either. We should all mix with each other as much as we can. But some people, it's just not for some people. As near as I can tell, my wife is like that. She doesn't like horror. She can never invest fully enough in the scariness. It's all kind of goofy to her. She's not scared by it. It's not that she doesn't like the extremity. It's that she's like, that dude, why didn't somebody just shoot Jason Voorhees in the head? Yeah, he's the hockey mask killer from Final 15. And I mean, in a sense, she's right, but I do think people who are afraid of horror often find the thrill and titillation and extremity they need, or they would have gotten from horror in other places. Sometimes I do think that humans need that stressor, that they need to feel human, they need to feel fear, and a lot of people get that fear from the 24-hour news cycle. Yeah, that delivers more than we can handle. You know?
And there's someone else who about sexual politics also put me up for a long
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
a long time.
For sure. Yes.
I was just interested in the open and closed system of justice, and
Yeah.
to hear more about that. And maybe it connects a little bit to questions of sexual politics when you get into systems where you're watching a kind of violence, sometimes it gets set up to be deserved.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm curious to know, like, I understand the internal logic
Yeah.
of how that would work, but if there's also a moral judgment sometimes that a writer or filmmaker is making, I'm just curious.
I think you can extract those moral judgments. Yes, they sometimes are packed in intentionally. I think in the good horror, they're not packed in. That's what I like to think. But we like to believe in a fair world, and for that reason, I mean, that's our fantasy: is the world is fair, bad is punished, good is rewarded. That's the ideal system. And when you engage a closed horror film or a horror story that's a closed system of justice, then for as long as that lasts, you get to believe in the fantasy of a fair world, where these people did bad and they get punished, and that's quite pleasant. And to tell you the truth, ever since like in 2016 when the election went one way and not the other, we on the news cycle saw people up at podiums doing and saying terrible things and walking away with not even a slap on the wrist at all. We saw terrible things that happening over and over, and I think that is largely responsible for the rise in popularity of horror in the past 6 or 7 years. Yeah, because we want to believe in a fair place, and horror is quite often a fair world. But to say truth, open cycles of justice are much more terrifying because they put us all in the victim role. Closed cycle of justice, we're like, I didn't ring the doorbell on a haunted house, and I wouldn't, so I'm not going to be in this story, you know? But you could be like Reagan in The Exorcist and just bopping along down the sidewalk, and suddenly you get a demon inside you and your head's backwards, you know? You're bummed out.
Thank you.
What else? Anything else? Yes.
Could you talk about the use or misuse of cliches and tropes, and not just horror, but I guess in genre fiction? It's such a big part of the art form, and knowing them or using them or misusing them, and then sometimes like breaking them in a obvious way is just, all that stuff.
Yeah. And there's a third term in there too. Yeah, there's conventions, tropes, and cliches. And like conventions are, it's almost like you're in a contract with the audience, the readers, to provide these 6 things in a story of this type. If you're telling a thriller story, there's going to come a moment in that story where the protagonist is at the mercy of the antagonist, tied to a chair and being threatened and all that stuff, and then we see them break free and overcome. And that's just a built-in part that you can't really avoid in a thriller. I think of it like when you're telling a story in a really codified genre, it's like you're on a merry-go-round, and the merry-go-round has these bells staged around it, like 12 bells, and you have to sit on your zebra or donkey or whatever it is, and you reach out and you try to hit each of those bells as you go around. If you hit each of those bells, you're satisfying the conventions of the genre, and the readers are like, I'm in a noir, I'm in a romance, or whatever it is, and they feel comforted. But if conventions can shade into cliches if you're not like original with them, if you're just like redoing the same thing over and over. The difference in conventions and tropes, people use those 2 terms interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable, I don't think. As I said, a convention are the things the reader knows are part of this genre and they expect you to provide when you write a story of this type. A trope is a type of shorthand. Like in a slasher, in the opening scenes, if you see a high school girl in a poodle skirt walking away from school with her books held to her chest and she's smiling and practically has a cartoon bird floating around her, that is the writer's shorthand for telling you that's the final girl, And I guess the big difference in a trope and convention is you can decode a trope to smuggle a message across to you in shorter form than it would take otherwise. Conventions are the bells you have to hit on the merry-go-round as you go around in this story, and cliches are, I'll be honest, I have not thought about cliches that much. I think they're just suffering from fatigue is what cliches are. They've been used to death. They don't have any life in them. It's almost like people say I have to piss like a racehorse. That feels cliche because it's been said so many times. If you say I gotta piss like a wildebeest who's been on a migration for 16 days, that's a different valence. And I'm not saying particulars or extremity is necessarily what refreshing is a cliche, but I'm not really sure what refreshing is enough actually. I will say avoid them, but that's kind of useless if I'm not even identifying them. Defining them very well. I don't honestly don't. I do think conventions can shade into cliche quite easily, but I haven't thought that through about cliches enough, and I don't think I can think it through with the mic very well right now. That's a good question, though. Yeah, thank you for it. Yes.
I kind of jumping off that, I wanted to hear if you could talk a little bit about, because we're talking about cliches and archetypes, your experience writing Final Girls, especially your last 2 books. I read The Chainsaw with Jade and Only the Indians with Denora, both kind of like are almost like not Denora, but more so Jade, are self-aware Final Girls in a sense. And I just wanted to kind of hear about your experience writing those, especially trying to stay away from like the historical prevalence of Final Girls and kind of how they've been exploited and how they've kind of been used as like almost like trauma killers in a lot of slasher films.
That's a good way to say it. Like the Final Girl through all the decades, all the different iterations of them over the decades, or since 78 or maybe Black Christmas 74, since or around then anyways, they've become these shining warrior princesses who don't need dental work. They're so perfect in every way that you can't inhabit that space. Like the idea of a final girl is that's supposed to be your model for how to resist bullies. You push back with everything you got, you don't give up. But final girls have become so difficult to identify with because they're so perfect that we can no longer find a space to occupy to resist our own bullies, I feel like. And so with when I do my final girl, I try to not set her up to be that perfect shining angel warrior princess. I try to make her real. I mean, you always try to make your characters real, but I try not to hold her to the model of the final girl. Or the Only Good Indian specifically, one of my problems with the final girl has always been that at the end of the story in the big showdown, when somebody's coming at her with a machete, she'll pick up her own machete and go blade to blade with a slasher. And what she's doing is she's adopting the slasher's tactics and characteristics. She's essentially becoming a minor version of him. She's like trading in her own identity for muscles, basically, which I think is a loss. She does usually kill the slasher temporarily, or for that movie, that story or whatever, but at what cost? She's lost herself. And so in The Only Good Indian, I didn't want Denora, the final girl in that, to have to cash in her identity. So I tried to build things such that she could win the day with compassion, understanding. And that was my best way at that point of coming at the final girl. Hopefully I find more and more ways. I don't know. I've got a book coming out called I Was a Teenage Slasher, which is pretty fun, or it's fun to write, I don't know if it's fun to read. But maybe I come at it a different way there, I don't know. But I'll keep doing it. Yeah.
Kind of sort of leading off of that question, I was wondering if you noticed like this kind of demographic disparities for horror, where you think like people would be interested in horror if it appealed to like what's scary for them. Because like one thing that I noticed is I watched Gone Girl with my sister and my dad. And my dad, it like scared the shit out of my dad. And my sister and I were like, this is oddly cathartic. Like it was like oddly comforting. Because like it's like finally a movie where men are like legitimately terrified of women. I'm just like, this is nice. But like for him, it was just like, oh my God, what is happening?
No, that's a good point. I think it's accurate too. I know a lot of women who have spent their lives completely invested in horror, and then they have a kid, and their values like reorient themselves a little, and they don't watch horror anymore. And I'm not sad for them. I'm happy for them. Of course, I think we need fear and stress in our lives, but I think having a young kid gives you all that you need too. Yes, it does appeal to different demographics. Certain types of horror, like slashers, I think appeal to the young more than the old. Possession stories, I am terrified of possession stories, and I wonder if that's because I'm American Indian, and I feel like our identity and our land has been possessed. We've been colonized, so possession stories have a dynamic which I see is very, very dangerous. But I think you're right. I can't run through the list of all the different people who would be scared of this more than that, but no, I 100% think you're right that it appeals in different ways. And I wonder if you can make like what they call a four-quadrant horror film that appeals to everyone. I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe Jaws might be as close as we get. Say what?
Oh no, I was just said Jaws, and I was just like,
I'm not sure. I don't know. Yes, in the middle.
Yeah.
Speaking on like the one toe method, how would you recommend approaching tactics like that in literature specifically, where you're not confusing your reader with lack of detail, or even just leaving them dissatisfied with lack of detail?
It's easy to think of detail as like a visual thing, but if you have a big bad antagonist in your non-horror novel, and I'm not saying non-horror science fiction, I'm probably leaning more towards literary, then it's your boss, say, or it's the character's boss, then go ahead and show that boss, but then as the story progresses, do like Joyce Carol Oates does, and Where You Going, Where Have You Been, and slowly reveal the monster under the mask, that this boss is appropriating funds to funnel it in a dogfighting or something. I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't have to be hokey like I just see his loafer around the corner, and that's terrifying. It doesn't have to be like that. You can think you see the whole person, and then slowly peel the layers away so that we see more and more of what's real. And that's like Sleeping with the Enemy is a good example of that. I would say it's more of a thriller than literary, but and there's a lot of stories like that. You know, or Pacific Heights. There's a lot of stories where you slowly pull the curtain back on this person's true self, their monstrousness. I think. Yeah. What else? Yes.
I'm interested in what you're saying about each reader or audience's like threshold, and I'm wondering if you consider your reader's threshold, or are you, all in a certain way?
Yeah, no, I do consider their threshold, but I consider it my duty to go past their threshold, if I can. But the problem is I have my own threshold, and some of their thresholds are higher than my own threshold. But I try to go past my own thresholds as well. I wrote one book, At Least My Scars. I wanted to see what it's like to go into dark spaces that I don't want to go into. And so I wrote that book, and I lost like 20 odd pounds while I was writing, because every time I sat down to write, I got physically ill, couldn't eat and everything. And, I'm not recommending you guys like a diet or anything. But yes, the reason people pay $24.99 for a book or whatever to a horror writer is because they trust that this horror writer can not only walk into the darkness as far as the reader can, but they can go the one step deeper into the darkness. That's why they pay the $25. So yeah, I think you have to, and it's not necessarily safe or good for you. Like what's that movie Panero with Benjamin Bratta? I don't know if any of y'all seen that. It's about that that Puerto Rican poet in New York?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Pinheiro, yeah. Pinheiro.
Yeah, it's a really good movie, and he gives a little like monologue on top of a building in that movie, where he explains that writing is like it's like you're pearl diving. So you paddle your boat out 50 yards into the ocean, you jump off, you swim down 15 feet, you get a pearl, you bring it up, you paddle it back, you give it to people on shore, and they're like, yes, we love this pearl is great. You're like, all right, this one's working, it's a good business model. You jump in your boat, you go back out 50 yards, dive down, there's no pearl, so you have to go out 30 yards. And it's deeper at 30 yards. And so you dive down, and you have to hold your breath longer, and it's a struggle. You come with a pearl, you bring it back, they're happy, and they say, bring us more pearls. And so you go out deeper and deeper and deeper until each dive is bursting your eardrums and trashing your lungs, and you're destroying yourself. And horror can do that to you. I think writing can do that to you. It's not just horror. I think it's worthwhile too. We do need those pearls, and so it does burn you up and use you up. But you get some good stuff down on the page, I think. So I like it anyways. Yes, I'm here.
I was wondering if maybe you could talk about like the supernatural anymore versus maybe something more like there's some sort of supernatural elements in a lot of slashers, but like you talk about a human monster versus a not real monster.
Human monsters are finally scarier, I think, to me. Because to tell you the truth, a supernatural monster, yes, it's terrifying. I don't want to face a vampire or a Dagon or any of that. They're going to eat me up. But if you open the door for the monsters to come through, that door is also open for like angels to come through. So it's good. It can be good too. If you allow the supernatural, then you allow all the supernatural. And that can be very positive to subscribe to, I think. But as I was saying during the talk, yes, your neighbor being vile is actually terrifying. If your neighbor is some version of a Ted Bundy, that's bad. You don't need the supernatural for horror. You need monstrousness, but monstrousness does not depend on the supernatural. Monstrousness, like we probably all have some element of monstrousness in us. We just got to keep it from metastasizing.
Oh yeah, I was wondering about it in relationship to how you talked about horror as an affirmation of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking of that as like horror is something that's unreal as like a proof of what is real. I was seeing that, in those.
I like that. I like that.
And I was wondering like maybe what the difference would be in terms of like something like you'd say if you might actually encounter a human serial killer, you probably aren't going to encounter a vampire.
Yeah. I mean, you can get that rush of being alive from either of them, of course, but I hadn't thought about those two kind of concepts being related, but I like that. I wonder if you get a different sense. Like, I guess it leads finally to if I get that rush of life from an encounter with a fictional vampire, does that make my rush of being alive somehow artificial? You know? But if you dial that back and take vampire out of it, does engaging the bluest eye, which is fake, does that, and we get real things from that, does that make the experience cheap? I don't think it does. I think that's actually the dynamic by which art works. You know, it's lies that somehow contain truth. It's almost, it's like with math. Multiply two negatives, you get a positive. I think that's how fiction works. You know, multiply two lies, you can get a truth. And that's kind of like I feel like that's a glib answer instead of an actual answer, but it's probably the best one I've got. That's a really good question, though. I hadn't considered that. Yeah, but somebody back here. Yeah.
So I wanted to know, I guess, what are your fundamental differences, are you between a psychological thriller and horror? Because I'm also thinking about like what you think of modern adaptations of like Mia Costa's Candyman, or like even Jordan Peele's like Get Out and Us and stuff like that, and like what would you constitute those films? But versus what are your fundamental differences between a psychological thriller and horror?
That's a question I've been wrangling with for a long time, and I keep waiting to talk to a thriller writer to ask them, what in the world do people mean when they say psychological thriller? Because I cannot figure it out. Because to me, all fiction is psychological, you know? And so I never, I always feel like psychological thriller is a coded way to say not high action, you know? That's what it feels like to me, but I'm not sure. So I don't think I can quite answer your question because I never have understood the terminology psychological thriller. That doesn't make sense to me, and I do feel like it's a coded way of saying something. Like when you hear a movie review that says, this is very deliberately paced, that's code for this is a snoozer, you know? And I feel like psychological thriller is a term like that, you know? But I've never understood exactly what it means. I mean, there are, you know, a lot of people will say the difference in a thriller and a horror is not mechanical. They have the same beats. The difference is horror has supernatural often. Thrillers don't have supernatural. I mean, that's I guess that's technically true, but it doesn't actually help me any, you know. So I don't think I know really what the difference is. It could be about the stakes, possibly. The stakes in what I would suspect is a psychological thriller might not be quite as mortal or as loud or as screechy as a horror. Possibly. I don't know. I'm sure I've read a lot of psychological thrillers, and I just thought, well, that was pretty gripping, but I don't know. The psychological is an adjective that always throws me. Like if there's a psychological thriller, should there also be an emotional thriller? You know, I don't know. I don't understand. I don't mean to dismiss your question. I'm really just saying I can't answer it adequately. I wish I could, you know. And I'm sorry I can't.
No, well, and I just have just on a personal level.
Yeah.
Did you see Jordan Peele's films?
Yeah, I've seen all of them, I believe, yeah. I love Get Out, and I love in Us. I love the lake sequence. I think that's really good.
That was like, sorry, I had a question with Us because it has the multiple monster thing. So I was just like, I was curious if you found that effective.
I think that's where I kind of uninvested in that story was when there was too many monsters, and then at the end when it's like a big everybody hold hands thing across the nation. I was like, this is like thematic or what's going on? I don't get it. And also my main problem with Us was I could not understand why these tunnels that are filled with rabbits as food. There's not rabbit turds like ankle deep. I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense to me.
Why didn't you just go upstairs? But may I continue the conversation about the psychological thriller a little bit?
Yeah.
Especially since you were talking about a little earlier.
Sleeping with the enemy?
Colonization.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so just kind of thinking about the psychological.
Yeah.
I've been sitting here just kind of thinking about the everyday and the kind of afterlives of historical horror, right? And that we live with that all the time. You know, speaking of too many ghosts, right? Like that's actually real in some ways. And so when I think about psychological horror, and I think about, I don't know, mind games. I think about paranoia. I think about the kinds of things our fears make us conjure and believe, you know, this kind of like hyper vigilant sense and projections of our innermost fears of what gaslighting does, the kinds of things that Get Out actually exploited, you know, which are very real things that are known that were ratcheted up into a certain kind of horror. I guess that's how I kind of understand the psychological horror is the mind game, like that old movie Gaslight, you know, like you make her lose her mind.
Or like the parallax movie is probably a second.
Sure, all of those kinds of things. I don't know, but maybe I'm trying to turn this into a question just about well, anyway, I'm also kind of not getting to the question, which was about horror and thriller, and where the psychological comes in. I agree that we have to rely on our psyche. I mean, that's part of how the horror is generated. There's something that's within us that's untapped, maybe inchoate, you know, without language, and that we kind of connect to things that are outside us that we can identify. And I think I just want to ask you something about the kind of racialized dimensions of horror, and kind of history, and I mean, because you said colonization and it just tapped everything that was on my mind.
No, I mean, I think horror works really well when it's a mirror that distorts our social anxieties, our fears, our certainties about racism. Like Jordan Peele with Get Out, he magnifies it and throws it back at us in a carnivalesque way, you know, and it's super, super effective. It doesn't let us process through it, but it does start a discussion about it. And that's like novelists and movie makers, their job is not to answer questions, their job is to start discussions, I think. And I think Jordan Peele is particularly, I don't know if he's good at that or if the audience got immediately trained to do that to his stories, you know, because I think you can do it to any story, really. But he does have a knack for maintaining some consistency in his stories, which submit really well to a read like that, you know. And I appreciate that. And Anthony, is this about Shadowland?
That's fine. I was trying to think about this in terms of Denora.
Yeah.
This Denora came up, and some of the other questions that followed. Follow that. The psychological, I was wondering if when you're building a book like that, right, and your characters, if some of the things and the terms that you've given us tonight, thinking about horror and genre, apply as you're building it, but particularly how I was wondering about if they do consciously for you or come to consciously later intersect with how you're thinking about the characters' psychological circumstances and, you know, and cultural, social circumstances. I was thinking about with Denora as the final girl, right, and the only good news, her relationship to the generations before her, specifically her father and all his buddies, and the whole. And I was thinking about that in relation to terms like open and closed justice, affirmation of life, right, within your circumstance. Like how do those intersect with psychological elements and the genre elements for you?
You know, when I write a horror story, I mean, it's a cop-out to say I move instinctually. I guess what I should say is I try to make it not be boring. And so I try to have things happening one after the other that I can't always explain, that are going to keep the reader off balance enough that I can catch them and carry them where I want to, if that makes sense. But I do think about all this stuff during revision. And revision is where a novel really kind of comes alive. Like with The Only Good Indians, I wrote it, and that Only Good Indians opens with Ricky Bosworth dying in a parking lot from a mob, or maybe an elm, or both. When I first wrote the novel, that came about 45% through the novel. It came like about a third of the way into Sweat Lodge Massacre, which is the middle section, the longest section. I think it's the second longest section. And then when I was revising, I knew I had tried to write a slasher. And I also realized that there's this one chapter that's free floating. I can move it ahead or behind of where it is, and nothing changes in the story. And that's a huge problem with the novel, because novels are sequential. You know, they have to happen like dominoes falling. It can't be just randomly placed. And so I thought, well, I got to throw the chapter away. But then when I consulted my slasher scaffolding, the genre, the conventions, I realized that slasher is always open with a kind of a random death where you don't quite see the bad guy, you know, the killer. And so I just turned Only Good Indians on its side, and that Ricky Bosworth chapter slid up to be the prologue, and everything locked into place. Then revision. I didn't initially conceptualize it. I found that my job as a writer is to sit at a keyboard and turn my brain off, and things can happen, you know? Revision, like, I write my first draft with my heart and my second draft with my brain, if that makes sense. I revise with my mind. But my mind only gets in the way when I'm trying to write a story. It does not help even a little bit. If I think about things, then I second guess myself into doing nothing, and every road around, I'm like, well, it could be this way, it could be that way. No, you just have to go forward, and you have to feel your way through. And then on revision, you make it mechanically sound, and you do it with these kind of tricks I've been showing, hopefully, And I'm not saying this is the only way to do horror. This is the way I think about horror. I'm sure there's a lot of different ways to do horror that I don't even have access to. It works wonderfully. But this is what I found works for me. And I'm not going to answer your question about how to braid together or set them in opposition. The psychological aspects and the cultural aspects. I will say that the cultural stuff that shows up in the Elegant Indians and Riders of Chainsaw and all my other stuff as well, it's never intentional. I don't go into it with a checklist. I just have certain resentments, hostilities, axes to grind, prejudices. I have all that. We all have that inside us. And every time I put pen to paper, that bleeds out, whether I want it to or not. And my job is to recognize when that's not didactic and let those ones live on the page, which is a trick. And it's often a trick that requires a workshop because I don't always have the best sense of which way to go. If that makes sense.
Just thinking about when you were talking about open and closed justice, thinking about the four friends on the Elegant Indians, and that. I mean, would you think of them as being set up as a classic, like they did their thing, they did the thing, and the book stretches out so much with we know this is coming for them, and they become so flawed but so charming. Right?
The question I wanted to ask with the Elegant Indians, aside from coming at the concept of the final girl, was has it ever been long enough from our transgressions that we should no longer punish them, And Ricky and Gabe and Cass and Lewis, they did a terrible massacre on these elk, and 10 years later, and they're mostly different people. They've grown up. They're no longer just blasting away and everything. Gabe is, I guess, but they've changed. When in my 20s, I did not want to think about the things I did when I was a teenager because I deserved a slasher coming for me, And I think we all have that, and we don't in our 30s. We don't want to think what we did in our 20s, But these guys have a specter from their past coming after them, and it's also problematized by the fact that we're sympathetic to her revenge. We think she deserves it, but do these guys deserve it? And so I wanted to problematize that dynamic because it is a close cycle of justice. When Elkhead Woman steps out of what's her purview are these four hunters. When she steps out of that to come for Denora, which should be illegal for her because Denora's never done any wrong, that's why Denora can beat her in basketball and can finally resist her successfully. That's the way I see it, anyways. And that's often why Final Girls and other slashers can put the slasher down because they weren't in that privileged crew who pulled somebody's pants down in fourth grade recess. They just fell into that crew after that happened when they moved to town or whatever. And so they're not within the purview of that slasher's punishment. And so they can therefore push back against it, if that makes sense. I don't think I've ever seen a Final Girl who was part of the bad gang of kids who did something terrible, who did a terrible prank that killed somebody or scarred somebody, who actually gets to survive. I don't think that would pass my. Jennifer Love Hewitt, isn't she the one when they run over that fisherman?
She wants to go.
Yeah, she's like, let's do the right thing, and everybody else is like, our futures. She doesn't. She tries though. And to me, that probably gets her a pass. They probably should get her a pass. Have you seen the series? Yeah, the series on Amazon.
Oh no, I haven't.
Oh, okay, I won't spoil it for you. It goes a different direction. Yeah. At the end, it goes a different direction. Anything? Probably got time for one more question. One more. Yes, in the back.
When I was briefly sort of talking about the differences between you were talking about explanation and you like to explain about the monsters, it's have to be more in certain sort of dark fantasy and stuff like that. Are there any sort of other differences that you feel kind of that sort of divider line between something that's dark fantasy and sometimes something that is, or I know that can be a fairly like transparent line.
Yeah, from maybe a blurry line. I think Clive Barker, quite often, his impulses are towards fantasy, but his special abilities seem to be for the horrific imagery, And so I think Clive Barker is 80% of his stuff is dark fantasy dressed up so horrifically that it feels like horror to us. And it's no weaker for that. He's a great writer and he lives all his play and all that, but that's not exactly what you're asking either. What else can horror shade into? Well, horror can shade into comedy most easily, I think, because the build of horror and comedy is the same: tension, tension, release, tension, tension, release. I think that's why so many comedians make really good horror. Like this recent Halloween trilogy we got was by somebody trained in comedy. Get Out, Jordan Peele, he comes from comedy. John Krasinski with A Quiet Place comes from comedy. Comedy people really understand the dread terror thing really well. And I think they understand it a lot better than a lot of us horror writers do, actually. And I'm glad they're bringing great blood into the genre and infusing new DNA. That's wonderful. But I'm still just searching around for an answer. I don't have a perfect answer for what you're asking, I don't think. But I'll be thinking about it till 2 in the morning. So thank you. And thank the rest of y'all for being here. This is fun.